Some stories don't begin with sunshine and laughter. They begin with a storm, the kind that rages quietly behind your ribs, waiting for the right moment to break free. Clara Bennett stood in the headtaker's office, her palms trembling, her throat thick with unshed tears. Across the polished oak desk sat Charles and Victoria Parker, perfectly dressed, immaculately smug, and staring at her as though she'd tracked mud onto their pristine carpets. They didn't even bother to hide their contempt to them. Clara wasn't a tired mother trying to defend her child. She was a single woman who'd clearly made a mess of her life, and was now raising a daughter doomed to do the same. The head, Mr. Hammond, sat stiffly behind his desk, his eyes darting from the Parkers to Clara, as though he'd rather be anywhere else. Mrs. Bennett, he began cautiously, we need to discuss an incident involving your daughter. Clara had rehearsed this moment in her head all morning, calm, logical, composed. She explained how Ellie had endured weeks of taunts, how Amelia Parker and her friends had whispered cruel things in corridors, how her daughter had come home crying nearly every day. She didn't attack anyone, Clara said steadily. She defended herself. Victoria Parker leaned forward, her perfume cutting through the air like a weapon. Your daughter pushed mine, she said crisply. That's violence. No amount of sob stories changes that. Clara blinked. After being bullied for weeks, Victoria's lips curved into a cold smile. Some children act out when there's no structure at home. It's sad, really. No father around. Just you, clearly overwhelmed. Some women simply aren't built to raise children alone. The words hit harder than a slap. Charles Parker, his voice smooth and rehearsed, slid a typed document across the desk. We're prepared to keep this out of the system if you sign this statement, he said. Clara stared at the paper. It wasn't just an apology, it was an admission. It said she had failed as a mother, that Ellie's unstable home had caused aggression, that she accepted full responsibility. You want me to say I'm a bad mother? She whispered. We'd like you to take accountability, Victoria said, her tone almost pitying. Perhaps consider a parenting course, or maybe a father figure program. Every child needs a man around. It's just biology. Even Mr. Hammond looked uneasy. But he didn't intervene. He simply cleared his throat and added, until you sign, Ellie will remain suspended. I'm sorry, Mrs. Bennett, but rules are rules. Something in Clara cracked then, quietly, almost imperceptibly, like the first fracture before glass shatters. They weren't just punishing Ellie, they were punishing her for being abandoned, for surviving, for refusing to break. She walked out of that office in a daze. Her legs felt like water, her lungs too tight to breathe. In the car park, she sat gripping the steering wheel, the tears finally spilling down her cheeks. By the time she reached home, Ellie was waiting by the window. Her face was blotchy, her small hands twisting the hem of her jumper. Mum, she whispered, am I suspended? Clara knelt down. Just for a little while, love. Ellie bit her lip. Because Amelia's right, isn't she? Because you're a bad woman. Because my dad didn't want us. Those words, soft, trembling, destroyed her. Clara gathered her daughter into her arms, her voice breaking. No, darling, that's not true. None of that's true. But the truth, the real truth, was that she was terrified. Terrified that maybe, deep down, Ellie did believe it, that the world had finally succeeded in making her daughter feel as unwanted as Clara once had. That night, after Ellie had fallen asleep clutching her worn-out teddy, Clara sat at the kitchen table staring at her phone. Her finger hovered over a contact she hadn't dialed in over 20 years. Edward Price, her stepfather, the man she'd pushed away out of stubborn pride, out of fear that needing him made her weak. She pressed call before she could talk herself out of it. He answered on the second ring. Clara. His voice was older, deeper, but calm, steady, like it had always been. For a moment, she couldn't speak. Then everything poured out. The bullying, the humiliation, the suspension, the cruel words about her being unfit, unworthy. There was silence. Then Edward spoke, and the warmth was gone from his tone, replaced by something cold and sharp. Listen to me very carefully, he said. You are my daughter. Ellie is my granddaughter. Those people have made a very serious mistake. You will not sign anything. You will not apologize. I'll deal with this myself. Edward, I don't want your money. This isn't about money, he cut in. This is about family, and I should have fought for you long ago. I won't make that mistake again. He paused. Meet me at the school tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock sharp. Clara hung up, her heart racing. For the first time in years, she wasn't sure if she felt hope or fear. Would he actually come? Or would this, too, end in disappointment. She stared out the window, the night pressing close, her reflection blurred by tears. Somewhere deep inside, the storm behind her ribs finally began to shift. Tomorrow would bring reckoning. The following morning dawned gray and heavy, the kind of British sky that looks like it's made of lead. Clara hadn't slept a wink. She'd sat awake all night, replaying every cruel word Victoria Parker had spat across that office, every sneer, every suggestion that she wasn't enough. Now, standing outside the school gates, her heart thudded like thunder in her chest. The clock on her phone read 8:59 a.m. At 8:55, she almost lost her nerve. At 8:57, she told herself Edward wouldn't come, that it had been foolish to believe he still cared. At 9 o'clock sharp, a sleek black Jaguar rolled into the car park and stopped directly in front of the building. The door opened. Out stepped Edward Price. He looked exactly like a man who commanded boardrooms. Silver hair, perfectly tailored coat, calm eyes that had seen too much of the world to be easily rattled. But when he saw Clara, that steel softened into something gentler. He walked towards her, slow but deliberate, and placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You look tired," he said quietly, "but you're not alone anymore." For the first time in 2 decades, Clara believed him. Together, they walked through the school doors. Students and staff alike turned their heads. Edward's presence carried the kind of authority that didn't need to be spoken aloud. When they reached the head teacher's office, Mr. Hammond looked up and his expression changed instantly. The polite professionalism melted into something like fear. He stood so quickly that his chair scraped across the floor. "Mr. Price," he stammered. I didn't realize." "I'm sure you didn't," Edward interrupted smoothly. "But you do now." Charles and Victoria Parker were already seated, looking as smug as they had yesterday, until they realized who had just entered. Victoria's painted smile faltered. Charles's confident posture deflated just a little. Clara sat beside Edward. He adjusted his cufflinks, calm as winter, and turned his attention to the head teacher. "Let's settle this properly," he said. Victoria regained her composure, crossing one elegant leg over the other. "We're simply here to ensure our daughter feels safe," she began. "We can't have violent children setting examples for others." Edward's eyes flicked to her cold, assessing. "Violent children," he repeated softly. "That's an interesting choice of words for a girl who's been tormenting my granddaughter for weeks." Mr. Hammond blinked. Well, we don't have official reports of that behavior." Clara spoke then, her voice trembling but firm. "I told you about the texts, the mocking, the way Amelia destroyed Ellie's art project and laughed about it. You ignored all of it." Victoria scoffed. "Oh, come on. Girls say things. It's harmless. Children toughen up." Edward cut her off like a blade. "Harmless? My granddaughter cried herself to sleep for weeks because of yours." "That isn't harmless, Mrs. Parker. That's cruelty." The room went silent. Even the ticking clock seemed to hesitate. Charles Parker leaned forward, trying to regain control. "With respect, Mr. Price, your granddaughter pushed my daughter to the ground. That's unacceptable, no matter the provocation." Edward smiled slightly, the kind of smile that never reached the eyes. "With respect, Mr. Parker, your daughter destroyed my granddaughter's work, insulted her family, and called her fatherless. She didn't push her, she defended herself, and you've both encouraged this behavior through your own prejudice." Charles opened his mouth to protest, but Edward wasn't finished. "By spreading gossip about my daughter, implying she's a bad mother, unfit, unstable, you've engaged in defamation. And trust me, Mr. Parker, I know exactly what that word means." Victoria's confidence crumbled first. "Defamation? That's absurd." Edward leaned forward. His voice was low, measured, and terrifyingly calm. "You think your money gives you power. You're mistaken. You see, I am the power here. I fund this school. I sit on the education board. I can have this entire matter reviewed publicly or handled quietly. Your choice." Mr. Hammond looked like he might faint. "Mr. Price, surely there's a way we can resolve this." "There is," Edward said. "Here's what's going to happen." He ticked each point off on his fingers. "Ellie Bennett will be reinstated immediately. The school will issue a formal apology to my daughter for mishandling the situation. The Parkers will submit a written apology to both Clara and Ellie, and Amelia will attend a bullying intervention program." He paused. "If any of this is refused, I'll take this to the press, to the school board, and to court. I assure you, none of you want that." The silence that followed was so deep it seemed to hum. Charles Parker's face turned crimson. Victoria's hands trembled in her lap. Even Mr. Hammond's voice shook when he finally said, "I think that's Fair. Clara sat frozen, hardly able to breathe. 20 minutes later, she walked out of that office holding a freshly printed apology letter and a reinstatement notice for Ellie. The cold November wind hit her face as they stepped outside, and she realized she was crying, not from pain this time, but relief. Edward didn't say anything for a while. Then he placed a hand on her shoulder and spoke quietly. "You're a good mother, Clara. Don't ever let anyone tell you otherwise." The words cracked something open inside her, not pain this time, but peace. She turned to him, her voice trembling. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did," he said. "Your family. That's what family does." For the first time in 20 years, she didn't argue. As they walked to his car, the wind rustling through the autumn leaves, Clara realized something she'd forgotten long ago. Strength isn't silence, and independence doesn't mean standing alone. It means knowing when to reach out a hand, and who will take it without hesitation. That afternoon, Clara sat in the living room, a cup of tea cooling between her hands. The house was quiet, the kind of calm that only comes after a storm finally breaks. The letter from the school lay on the table, crisp white, stamped with apology. It almost looked unreal. Ellie was upstairs, humming softly as she painted. That sound, gentle, ordinary, was enough to make Clara's throat tighten. Just the day before, her daughter had been broken by cruel words. Now, she was creating again. That was what healing looked like. Not loud, not dramatic. Just steady, quiet, brave. The doorbell rang. Edward stood there, holding 2 paper bags from the bakery down the road. "Brought scones," he said with a small smile. "Figured we'd earned them." Clara couldn't help but laugh. It had been so long since laughter felt natural in her home. "Come in," she said. "You might as well finish what you started. Tea's gone cold." He stepped inside, setting the bags down as if he'd never left. For a moment, the years between them dissolved, all the stubborn silence, the missed birthdays, the pride that had kept them apart. Now, there was just family, imperfect, mended, real. They sat together in the kitchen, the same kitchen where, years ago, Clara had once shouted that she didn't need anyone. Edward hadn't argued then, he'd just left her to learn her own way. Now, he broke the silence. "I owe you an apology, you know," he said quietly. Clara frowned. "For what?" "For not pushing harder when you pushed me away. You were hurting, and I mistook it for hatred. I should have known the difference." She looked at him for a long moment, the words sinking deep. "And I owe you one too, for thinking needing help made me weak." Edward gave a small nod. "We both made mistakes, but the important thing is, we're here now." Clara smiled faintly. "You handled them brilliantly today, by the way. The Parkers didn't stand a chance." His lips twitched. Bullies never do when someone finally tells them no. Just then, Ellie appeared at the kitchen door, her hands smudged with paint. She froze when she saw Edward. "Mum, is that—" "Yes," Clara said softly. "This is your granddad." Edward's face softened instantly. "Hello, Ellie. I've heard a lot about you, all of it good." Ellie tilted her head, cautious at first, but when he handed her a paper bag, curiosity won. "Is that—" "A scone, the best in town," he said, "but it comes with one condition. You have to promise to show me your artwork after." Her grin broke like sunlight. "Deal." Clara watched them together, something loosening in her chest, a tightness she hadn't even realized she'd been carrying all these years. For the first time in her adult life, she didn't feel alone in the fight. That evening, as the sky turned gold over the rooftops, Edward stood to leave. Ellie was upstairs again, the soft scratching of pencils floating down the hall. "Thank you," Clara said, standing by the door. He gave her a knowing look. "Don't thank me. Just promise me you'll stop shutting people out. Strength isn't about silence, Clara. It's about knowing who deserves to stand beside you." She nodded, her eyes shining. "You know, Mum used to say something like that. I learned it from her," he said, smiling. Then he hesitated. "You've done a good job with Ellie, better than you think." Clara blinked back tears. "I've spent so long trying to prove I could do it alone. I never realized I didn't have to." Edward put a hand on her shoulder. "No one does." He left soon after, but the warmth of his presence lingered, not like an echo, but like a light finally switched on in a room that had been dark for too long. Later that night, Clara climbed the stairs and stopped outside Ellie's door. Her daughter was asleep, her paintbrush still clutched in one hand, her masterpiece drying beside her, a butterfly, the same project Amelia Parker had destroyed, now reborn in brighter colors. Clara stood there for a long time, smiling through tears. Then she whispered into the quiet, "You're not fatherless, love. You're fearless." The words hung in the air like a promise. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, that was certain. But for once, Clara didn't dread them, because now she knew that family wasn't about who left. It was about who stayed. If this story moved you, hit that like button of your heart, because this is what real family looks like when love stands tall against cruelty. Comment below if you believe being single doesn't mean being alone. It means being strong enough to rise and brave enough to ask for help when it matters. And subscribe for more stories where justice isn't just spoken, it's delivered with dignity.